Hey, good morning and welcome everyone to another Account-Based Friday. This Friday, we have a special guest hailing from Massachusetts, Lucy Gillard, and she's got a tremendous background of enterprise software companies, which we'll get into in a moment. You may remember this poll if you joined us from last week, and if you didn't join us, it's going to be brand new. But we thought that this particular poll in question was really relevant for the topic that we're talking about with this convergence of demand and marketing operations, and really getting from a candidate or a job seeker perspective, trends that we're seeing or Lucy's seeing relative to this poll. And Meg, I think you had a commit last week, but I didn't get your point of view on this poll last week. I know what surprised me about the poll was the perceived internal value of marketing operations was so high in this poll. It really stuck with me even after last Friday's conversation. In my mind, I'm thinking, oh, marketing operations and demand are so valued. Yet it seems like a lot of people are saying, well, maybe not so fast. What was your reaction out of curiosity to this poll?
Um, it's unfortunate that this is the case, but I understand why. Marketing operations is essentially a cost, right? Even though it's sort of a force multiplier for all the other parts of marketing and for sales, it doesn't necessarily have a direct link to revenue. So in tight budget moments, you're going to have a hard time making a case for adding cost for what is probably a bit opaque to most other leaders within the organization. Marketing and sales, I think, really understand the value and the potential impact of having operations and why it's critical. But once you go outside of that, because the things that marketing operations does are, to use that old phrase, so inside baseball, when it comes to marketing, it may be a little hard for them to say, well, why do you need this? Can't you just do this, with the other people you have on your team? Which is too bad, because most of the time the answer is because they don't know how to do it. But the reality is, you kind of got to live in this world, and hopefully, make sure that as growth continues, you get the opportunity to add this, and you can continue to work on articulating the value of the role. But one of the other ways around it is something that I think Lucy can comment on. And Lucy, so happy to have you joining us this week. I've been able to work with Lucy as both a client and a colleague. She has been at some incredible companies at Cognos, IBM, Akamai, Forrester, just tremendous background and perspective. And in particular, relevant to this, a huge champion of the role of marketing operations and the strategic value of marketing operations, in particular from the vantage point of her work as a demand leader. So really happy to have you here, and would love to get your take on our poll, Lucy. What do you think? Does this surprise you?
It does. And I want to actually start by saying thank you. This is an honor, and I'm very excited to be here. And this is such a great topic. It surprises me, and yet I guess it doesn't, because I have seen this in our organizations, and I'm seeing it in the job market today, where marketing operations doesn't appear to be as relevant as it should be, in my opinion. And I think some of it, so everything you said, Meg, I completely agree with. And so I think one of the things we have to do is a better job of marketing operations. And it's complicated. So where a lot of folks will say, well, you just need to simplify, or it shouldn't be that complicated. This is marketing. We have to educate people on why there is complexity here, and the incredible role that marketing operations plays. It's only getting more and more important as we talk about AI, and we want account-based everything. It's data, it's the analytics, all these things, and the technology, which typically this sits under marketing operations. So we need to educate, and I think even within marketing, we need to do that. If you're not part of demand, you may not understand marketing operations. And I remember at Akamai, we didn't have marketing operations, and when the first person came in, we were in a meeting room, and he introduced himself, and I didn't know that he was coming on board. I went over there and I whispered in his ear, "You are now my best friend." And, you know, I needed to, and I worked hard, I think, as well as he did, to make sure that people understood what he was bringing to the table. So I think we have to do that. And this poll clearly indicates we need to do that.
Yeah, completely agree. And Lucy, part of why I'm so excited to have you here is I think you've been exploring something that's really relevant to both companies looking to hire the talent they need and for those currently in the job market. And of course, applying your great analytic skills and observation and experience to the current talent market, you've been able to kind of tease out some really interesting trends that I think are important for a lot of folks to understand. And I would love for you to talk a little bit before we jump into the first area about how you've arrived at some of these conclusions and the perspective you're taking on the market.
Sure. So, and I'll back off a little bit on necessarily conclusions, but certainly interesting talking points. And that's what I've been doing. It's been, you know, looking for a job is taxing. And one of the things I've been trying to do is making it more interesting and fun and trying to have more of a relationship, talking with recruiters and hiring managers, and digging in a little bit. But I've also been talking with a lot of my former colleagues, and we've been discussing a number of these topics. And what are you seeing in the market? And it's today when you look at the jobs, and I was talking with John about this when we were in the green room, because so many roles are remote now. A job may be posted, and within 48 hours, there could be hundreds of applicants. So the wonderful thing is there's a nice big pool out there that's very diverse, but there's an awful lot of people applying. And what the great news is we're seeing a lot more jobs, I think, now popping up. So I've been having discussions with a lot of folks, and it's been really fun, actually, and interesting. And so, yeah, there's the topics that we put to discuss today are ones that kind of percolated to the top that were interesting. And they're both from a recruiter perspective as well as somebody who's looking for a job.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and one of the topics that we wanted to cover today is relevant to our poll, which is the increasing convergence of demand and marketing operations, which could solve some of that marketing operations problem as soon as it's connected directly to demand. That makes it a lot easier. But would be interested to get your take on how those roles have changed, merged, and what you think indicates a company taking a more progressive stance on what those roles can be.
Yeah. So I think, we've seen, I'll say, way back we had like integrated communications, integrated marketing. And as we have seen, I think the kind of the progression, we've seen demand gen, which I tend to think of as more top of funnel, right? Because demand should be a lot more than just generating. It should be seeing the demand all the way through and beyond, right? With customer retention. Because it's about automating and engaging, bringing them in and keeping them engaged. You can't do that without having a strong operations backbone around the data and the technology and the analytics. Super important. So when I look at a number of the roles out there, it's interesting. I'll say just in terms of the titles, folks want to keep an open mind to, yes, I actually have seen integrated communications or integrated marketing lately, which is kind of like, oh, wow. And that says something possibly about the company. Keep that in mind. But we see, demand, broad, demand gen. You read the job description, it's way beyond gen. So good, make sure you're looking at it. I think most people would. And then we also see revenue marketing and growth marketing. So if you set your filters, open them up a bit, because that is, I think, the most progressive organizations are looking at revenue marketing or growth marketing. When I look at the role of operations in there, I see operations very much in a tight partnership in revenue and in growth marketing. Those are going to be the most progressive companies that are typically working with sales. You've got a tight partnership. You might even have a rev ops function in there. And that's really, that kind of can be the ultimate fun, but you want to dig deep and make sure that there's a real commitment, and that it is not that there is a strong marketing operations function. So I've also found organizations where there is a rev ops function, but it's not strong on the marketing side. It's more sales oriented. So you want to make sure that there is a strong marketing ops function. So that's really, as we look at that convergence and how it plays, take a look and see what that role has in it. And also, if you don't see marketing operations or the functions of marketing operations as you're interviewing and they're not in the company, talk to them about that. To me, it's a big red flag, but there can be plans for that. You want to ask how they're managing their data today. And I'll jump into one of the things that we had talked about, which is account-based everything. That means that you've got to have data around your accounts, right? And who's in the account, who your buyers are. What does the buying group look like? What titles and roles do you want to make sure that you're bringing in for sales? You can't do that with a strong operations backbone. Right? And the technology that can grab all that and actually make it actionable from a marketing perspective and provide the insights that sales needs to be able to do what they want to do. So, if I do see it quite often on these job descriptions, experience in account-based marketing, they'll push it. They're going to be very focused or are focused on account-based marketing, but ask the question, how mature are they in their journey for account-based marketing? And if they say, well, you know what, this happened recently, we finally got from 4 instances of Salesforce down to 3. So what are the plans to bring that down further? How tight is sales, and like what kind of convergence do they have there on the data, so you actually can do account-based everything? So, those are important things to ask. And again, marketing operations, absolutely critical. So ask the questions, and you can help if you've got a strong interest and knowledge and experience in marketing operations, help build that into the organization. And it comes back to the marketing ops. It's really important.
I love how you said the data, and the data is the backbone there. So many companies often overlook that. And to your point about the technology, then you layer on the technology onto a bad data platform, and you're not going to get the ROI that you had hoped for, or
Yeah.
really wanted to get. And it reminds me actually of I've been to a couple conferences over the last 2 weeks. I was at Pavilion 2 weeks ago, and then most recently this week at 6 Sense. And the 6 Sense CEO said the same thing. Actually came out in his keynote and said, you've got to have the people and the process and the data really working in harmony in order to get the platform to work properly. And to hear a CEO kind of come out and say that
That's awesome.
is pretty interesting.
Right.
But building on, kind of that thought process and your mention of technology, I'm curious, like what kind of consequences or unintended consequences do you see in this job search that people are asking for as part of hands-on experience in systems, or just even having the systems? Are there any unintended consequences that you've run across in your experience?
I think one of the interesting things that I have noted is this request for hands-on. Got to be hands-on, and it's not just hands-on in one area. It's the multitude actually that gets that makes you go, huh? Because you need hands-on experience, social media, paid media, in marketing automation, in analytics. If somebody is hands-on experience in all of those, and you're looking for a leader of an internal organization, chances are it's going to be really tough to be careful what you ask for. If you've got that much hands-on experience, what is their leadership experience and their management experience? So one unintended consequence is you're not going to find that unicorn. It's a lot, and I have talked with. I had a really interesting chat with a recruiter, an external recruiter, recently, and she referred to it as, if I get this right, we're looking for a unicorn holding a needle in a haystack. and it's because they want somebody who's hands-on, 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 you know, all these different, and also extremely demand knowledgeable. And that's really tough to find. I think also if you're too focused on that, it concerns me because I mean I've seen job descriptions for leadership positions that don't they're not asking about the leadership or focusing on the leadership capabilities and the management capabilities. And so it does make me wonder how important is that to them? And that's something, you know, you don't say I'm not going to pursue this if you find the role interesting, but you want to make sure that you're digging into that in terms of the culture of the company and the organization that you're looking at. So if you're looking, and hopefully, you know, folks are looking for T-shaped managers out there, leaders, so they've got experience, but I would say to hiring managers and recruiters, be careful with the hands-on and think more about a working knowledge of, understanding the capabilities, understanding the requirements of, more than the hands-on.
Yeah. Well, to your point about T-shaped, if that's not a term that people are familiar with, can you explain a little bit more about what that means?
Sure. So T-shaped is where you have experience or knowledge or both in multiple disciplines. So you're bringing a well-rounded view as you go in to lead. So you have an understanding of, and I look at this as a demand leader. There are multiple sub-disciplines within demand. I personally have experience in either hands-on or managing people who are hands-on in each of those. There's like 8 of them. That's the T-shaped, right? Versus sometimes folks look for somebody who's just very specific in one area. Like they do a deep dive. And my expertise is really, you know, across, and I love that because, and I think that, by the way, of course, I'm a little biased, but I think that matters when we're talking about demand. Same thing we talk about bringing in this convergence with operations. You have to understand how all that works together. It's a system. And if you know, and I've seen this firsthand, a struggle when folks have got an interest and they might come from brand and they're coming into demand and they don't have that knowledge or experience. It's a struggle because, as I said earlier, it is complicated. It involves technology and data and policies, and it's just and it gets a bit more mind-boggling every year, right? So, and that's where operations. It's actually, especially in a for a global role, you need an organization that can, by the way, have people who deep dive on, you know, security and privacy policies and how do you manage that globally? How does the technology work for all that? One person can't do all that, but a good T-shaped manager will know who to hire to do that.
Well, and you bring up an interesting point there too, Lucy, which is it depends on the stage of company, right? So
Mm,
if you've got a startup
great point.
that's very early stage, you know, sub 10 million, they're going to have a different need for the type of leader versus a company that is 50 to 100 versus, you know, 100 million to 500 and so on. And there are inflection points where you would expect an organization to have different parts. Um, I think, do you factor that into when you're evaluating a role profile and thinking about what it's saying to you? Or are you looking at the stage of company as well?
Yes, that is a great question. And absolutely. And that's where, you know, when we think about the hands-on, it is important to me. Hands-on would also mean, and I think this is maybe what some companies are looking at, is somebody who's willing to dig in and get their hands dirty. And that's I think all of us here on this call are absolutely there. It means, you know, being willing to dig in and learn how to be hands-on in certain cases. And that's going to be, if you're somebody who doesn't want to get their hands dirty, you may not want to be looking at, you know, organizations that are in the you know, below 500 million or 100 million, because you're going to need to jump in. You're going to need to coach. So and so absolutely very important to look at where they are. The other part of that is all of these capabilities are necessary. So if it's a smaller organization, being able to bring in external support is going to be important. What is the opportunity to bring in consultants? So you may only need somebody for a month or two to help stand something up, to establish a process, to help you figure out the technology. You may not need somebody full time, or you just can't afford it. And that's fine too. So if if you see a role that you're passionate about and you're thinking, well, the company, I'm not going to have a staff, that's okay, as long as you can get the support that you need. So I would say don't dismiss it. There can be good opportunities as long as there is the funding there to help get the support. Companies are going to have to do that if they're investing in demand. And if you want to grow, you're going to have to invest in demand.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just going to build on that investing in demand question. And I know you had mentioned account-based earlier. I'm curious, and I know we're pushing up against the bottom of the hour here at time, but I'm curious, what trends are you seeing around account-based in terms of the searches or skills that they're asking for? Is it the same as demand? Is it different from demand? Like where do you see that kind of coming out?
So what I'm seeing is it is in almost every job role that I'm seeing posted. So yay. And it is part of demand. Now, for the most part, I actually have been surprised because in my career, account-based marketing has been pretty much always part of what demand does. It's a tier of how we look at demand and how we scale. But I have talked to a couple of organizations that have account-based in a separate team, in a silo. And that's a little bit of a red flag if it's truly a silo. But it can certainly work, and I have seen that before. I mean, that was definitely in parts of IBM how we worked. So you can make it work as long as there's tight collaboration, and then you get both teams fighting for the right kind of data and technology to make it all happen.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think paying attention to how different aspects of demand are structured can tell you a lot about the hurdles, political and data, you may run into. And speaking of that, there's one that you found that I thought was super interesting, which is a requirement to be able to work in an ambiguous environment. Talk about a loaded phrase. Um, and you're seeing it in more and more role profiles based on, what you're hearing and seeing. I would love to get your take on what that can mean and how candidates can position themselves successfully, but also be smart shoppers and ask the right questions of organizations who put that into a profile.
Yeah, that when I actually saw it in writing the first time, my jaw dropped. Now, keep in mind, I am not saying that you shouldn't be flexible, agile, whatever word you want to use. Things change, right? The world changes in an instant. So we all have to be flexible, but ambiguous means lack of commitment. And and as a demand marketer, that's heresy. It's all about goals and targets, and you build plans, right? I talked about the complexity here. If you're building plans and you're creating the programs and the systems to bring in that demand and to drive that growth, and now the target changes, you have to rebuild that, and it takes time, right? These things are they build. And so it should always be aligned with sales. And so that would mean, in theory, sales is always changing, right? So that's a great big red flag if an organization is changing their goals that much. So as a hiring manager and as a recruiter, I would be cautious on the word ambiguous. And if you really mean, you just have to be flexible. But I think more often than not, oftentimes it means, and I have talked with folks about this, things change a lot in the company, right? They're constantly shifting targets. That's a big red flag to me.
Gotcha. Well, I think we're at time here, Lucy. This has been awesome to talk about the trends that you've been seeing. Are there any closing thoughts, Meg, from your side?
Well, I'll turn that over. Just thank you, Lucy, for joining us, and appreciate the lens that you're putting on, helping people think about smart ways to approach their own journeys to find a new role or to hire someone for a new role. Any last thoughts you'd like to share?
I'd say first of all, thank you guys. This is very fun. And I'd say, for folks who are looking, it's tough right now. It is. And everyone says that. If you haven't listened to the session from 2 weeks ago by Wes or with Wes, listen to it. Just hang in there, try to be positive, learn from it, and build relationships. And feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk.
Awesome. Well, with
Thank you.
that, and love that plug for watching from 2 weeks ago. We'll be back here next week, same time, with a mystery guest. So stay tuned, and thank you for joining this week.
Happy Friday.